Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Hurricane Preparedness Webinar. We're so glad you guys could join us today as we discuss the important information in a really important topic. Give you some resources and some practical application to help your communities prepare for the upcoming hurricane season. My name is Zoe Prince, and I'm the Fort Myers Regional Director for Alliant, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and introduce today's speakers. We're lucky enough today to be joined by Chris Cebula and Burke Schmidt from RTI, along with our very own Lindsay Pauley. So thank you all for being here today and for sharing your expertise and insights with us all. To all of you attending, we truly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us. Our goal is for today's webinar to provide valuable information, practical guidance, and helpful tools that will support you and your communities throughout hurricane season. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters for a brief little statement before we dive right into this panel.
Sure. Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Just a quick add-on, if you do have any questions, there should be a Q&A button at the bottom. Feel free to type them in, and then we're going to stay and answer any of the questions. We're trying to keep this to under an hour total, but if there's good questions, we'll stay on and answer them. Just a brief background about myself. Burke and I have been doing condo associations for 16 years on the insurance side. We actually were roommates at FSU, and we have degrees in risk management. So I like to think of us as insurance nerds through and through. But a lot of the things we're going to talk about today has really been framed from experience. First from Irma, then from Ian. And Ian was obviously a totally different beast than Irma was from the flood standpoint. We actually had an office on Fort Myers Beach that got washed away post-Ian. And we had probably 600 plus claims across our book during Ian. So a lot of what we're going to discuss today is really just direct experience from that.
Thank you, Chris. Burke, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, he kind of hit it all. But yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining the webinar. My name is Burke Schmidt. I'm a licensed agent and also a licensed claims adjuster. And as Chris said, been in the industry for 16 years. Chris and I work hand in hand on all association accounts, and we started the condo HOA division within RTI. And I've grown that from 0 to right around 250 associations in Florida. And we also have a team of 12 that solely works on our association division.
Awesome. Thanks, Burke. Thanks, Chris. Again, thank you all so much. I also do want to note that we will be giving away, RTI will be giving away 2 $50 Amazon gift cards at the end. So stay tuned and hopefully you are a winner. So that being said, let's dive in. So what is the most common failure that you see before a storm that creates the biggest downstream financially or operational loss, and how could it have been prevented?
Sure. I can take this one to kind of set the stage and frame the risk a little bit. It's typically a culmination of a few different factors, but they all tie to the same macro factor. And the reality is it's not having a clear plan or your vendors lined up well in advance of the storm ever hitting. If we saw a lot of clients in a situation where they were calling contractors after the storm hit, and they had never spoken to those contractors before, that is a recipe for disaster. It usually ends with significant overcharges and project delays. And so the biggest thing that we're going to stress today, and we'll get into the details as we work through, would be having a clear plan with your vendors well in advance before the storm hits.
And Chris hit kind of the non-insurance side. So from an insurance standpoint, 2 failures come to mind. The first being not having a clear understanding of the scope of work that's covered by insurance versus uninsured. So associations need to understand coverage limitations and then also have a financial plan in place for uninsured items. And then the second failure is going to be lack of documentation, both pre and post-storm documentation. So property should maintain up-to-date photos and videos prior to storm season to establish that baseline condition. We have storm season rapidly approaching next week. Hurricane season starts on June 1st. So if your association doesn't already have that stuff on file, we would recommend acting pretty quickly. And far too often what we see delays because associations, they're waiting on either insurance approval or a full adjuster inspection before taking action. But if coverage is clearly understood and that pre and post loss documentation is in place, associations can move forward with initial repairs and take steps to protect the property from further damage.
Thank you. So, Lindsay, from your experience, what were some of the biggest differences between communities that recovered quickly after the storms and for those that face a longer recovery time?
Well, that's a great question, Zoe. Honestly, the biggest difference was whether the community had funds available right away. Communities with available cash were able to start cleanup and immediate repair, which prevented further damage and speed up recovery overall. A lot of communities that were waiting on insurance proceeds or loans often delayed, which taking those steps while trying to deal with all the adjuster guidance and things like that really made all the recovery longer and ultimately may have created more damage because you're waiting for so long to make the decision.
Yeah, that's a really great segue into the next question. How should associations be structuring their financial strategy around hurricane risk, specifically balancing reserves, liquidity, and the realities of hurricane deductibles and coverage gaps like wind versus flood?
Yeah, so I can start on that one. And I'll touch on deductibles and then also some of those uninsured items that I previously mentioned. So the largest deductible that Florida associations face, it's pretty obvious. It's going to be related to wind events. So your hurricane deductible, it's calculated as a percentage of the insurable value. It's going to be 2, 3, 5% of the respective building value. So to give an example, if we have a building insured for $1 million with a 5% hurricane deductible, we have a $50,000 deductible for that building. So this can really escalate if we have insurable values get up there or if we have quite a few garden style buildings. And we're currently in a soft market. There's a lot of carriers that have entered. There's a lot of competition. So hurricane deductibles, they're pretty commonplace. They aren't hard to come by. But when the market shifts, some carriers, they'll start to offer what's called a wind hail deductible. So with a hurricane deductible, the percentage is only going to apply for a named category 1 through 5 hurricane. Whereas with a wind hail deductible, you're going to be subject to that percentage for any wind event. It could be a tropical depression, tropical storm, tornado. So if we have that hurricane deductible, any wind event that isn't a named category 1 through 5, it's going to revert to the all other perils deductible. Usually that's going to be $5,000. So to give one example where that delta can be pretty large, let's say we had a tornado. We've had more touchdowns than tornadoes recently in our area in Southwest Florida. That tornado damages 3 buildings. If we have a hurricane deductible, you're going to be subject to that all other peril deductible once, $5,000. Whereas we have that 5% wind hail, $50,000 per building. So we're talking $150,000 aggregate deductible in that example versus $5,000. So definitely something to pay more attention to once the market does shift. And then transitioning to uninsured items, landscaping. This was a big one with Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Irma. Trees, shrubs, all the landscaping is not covered by your property or flood policy. There is a small extension called debris removal if we do have a tree that falls on a building to remove and haul away that tree. But if you're purely looking at replacing damaged landscaping, there is no coverage under property or flood policies. And then another thing to watch for with flood policies, all the ancillary items that we don't pay too much attention to on a flood policy are not covered. Fences, walls, gates. A big one with Ian was swimming pools and their equipment, gate equipment. Any structure that isn't permanently attached to the residential building, it's going to need its own flood policy, a clubhouse, pool house, guardhouse.
Yeah, and I mean, Burke, great points. And I think just to kind of add to that, Burke is explaining all of the things that come from the insurance bucket. And as we talk about a proper hurricane plan, we have to think through the different buckets of money that the association could potentially pull from, right? So your 2 most obvious are your operating account and your reserve account. However, reserves are normally tied up in CDs or longer term windows. But if your roof blows off in a hurricane, you can unlock the roof reserves to make those repairs. But the question ultimately is, how much time is going to elapse before you can access that capital? So you've got your operating, your reserves. I'm a big fan of having a line of credit already approved prior to the storm ever hitting. I know that there's a cost associated with that, but that is your way to access quick capital, because I am yet to see an association fully reserved or have a fund that would totally cover the hurricane deductible, as well as the uninsured items that Burke had mentioned. The other buckets are disaster assistance loans, which you can't apply for until after the storm hits and can be severely delayed. What we saw with Ian, it took months at best to get any type of disaster assistance money, and assessments, which nobody wants to levy unless it's absolutely required. But at best, with an assessment, you're still a couple weeks out before you levy and you're able to collect the assessment. Your final bucket are your insurance proceeds, which is what Burke was talking about. But the reality with the insurance proceeds, there's a delay associated with that as well. So in my mind, there are really 6 macro buckets that you can pull from. And having those outlined up front is critical, because if there's one thing that I want everyone to take away from this call, insurance companies do not penalize reasonable temporary repairs to protect the property, but insurance companies will always penalize delay and lack of documentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. So, Lindsay, after Hurricane Ian, how prepared were some of our associations financially to handle hurricane deductibles and begin the mitigation work immediately after the loss?
So I had just been with Alliant for about a year once Ian hit. So this was really my learning experience as well. And I definitely could find that we had at least 100 associations file claims during Ian. I would say around 30 of them had to special assess their residents afterwards to help cover those costs. But truly, less than 10% of the associations had really enough cash readily available to, fully cover those hurricane deductibles. So if an association is trying to fund something after the storm hits, we all know you're already behind the ball. So if communities recover faster when they already have a plan in place, including who has the authority to make decisions that's been mentioned before, how funds can be accessed quickly without waiting on insurance proceeds, I would say one recommendation that I would say, even though we are a little bit further away from budget season, but something to keep in mind, is to create a dedicated hurricane fund for deductibles and uncovered expenses. Also, something important to review is your governing documents. That's a big one. Review those ahead of time. And since some associations may require a membership approval for some of those special assessments or reserve use, I would definitely review all those.
A really good point, Lindsay. As we gear up towards budget season, my mind's going, specialty line items, let's get prepared for this. But thanks so much. Chris, what does a properly built pre-storm operational plan look like, both from like a vendor stack and a contracts perspective? And where would you find that most associations tend to fall short?
Sure. I'll let Burke answer the second half of this question, but in my mind, there needs to be a written plan that answers the following questions. And Lindsay started to touch on this earlier, but who has authority on the board level to make decisions in an emergency situation? It should be 1 or 2 people max. If one of the mistakes that we saw was waiting for complete alignment from all 5 board members. And the reality of the situation is, depending on the severity of the storm, living arrangements, things like that, you may not have access to all 5 board members. And waiting for a consensus on every decision created a ton of delays. So I think you have to outline how much emergency spend is authorized. Obviously, all this is in conjunction with your documents too. So that's part of the planning. Understand what you are allowed or not allowed to do from a document perspective. But outlining who is going to make those decisions. Make sure that you have had recent contact with your vendors. I have met a lot of clients that say, yep, we have a hurricane plan. It's in this booklet. And then a booklet will get dropped in front of me. And I'll ask, well, when was the last time you actually talked to this contractor? And it could be a year or 2 years prior. And the reality of the situation is contractors change all of the time. And if they may have had capacity to handle your building prior to, they may not today. So I would definitely dust off those booklets and make sure that you've had recent contacts with the vendors. Another thing, as you're talking through these vendors, I would ask for rate charts. There are certain rates that are standardized from these vendors. Now, there will always be your variable costs. Sometimes you see uptick in labor or material pricing after a storm due to supply and demand issues, but you should have a baseline up-to-date rate chart. I always suggest in May or June, right at the beginning or before hurricane season starts, so you have an idea of what the cost is going to be for certain components. I would also define upfront who is going to be the boots on the ground. You're going to need somebody to be able to visit the property once it's safe, to coordinate those contractors, to coordinate with insurance adjusters, to communicate with the residents. So that's what I would be focusing on in terms of a properly pre-built storm program.
And I can drill down a little further on the vendors. So from the vendor standpoint, it's important to recognize very few are going to be able to encompass the entire scope needed after a storm. So having the correct vendors ready to take action is critical. And I'll touch on 3 different needs after storm damage. The first being rain, flood, water damage. We're going to need a restoration contractor for this. They need to rip out drywall, carpets, cabinets, other porous materials that were touched by flood water. And they should know how to remediate the flood damage because it's different than your typical water damage from a burst pipe or leaking appliance. We can't dry out flood water damage with blowers or fans. So carriers, the NFIP, they want you to document and then remove these items to prevent further mold growth. And the restoration contractor should be documenting everything with photos and providing invoices that are broken out by labor and material cost. And now keep in mind, these are going to be the most popular people in the area after a catastrophic hurricane. Most of your local reputable restoration contractors, they're going to be dealing with schools, hospitals, government facilities. So this puts a little more of utmost importance on considering those pre-loss agreements to eliminate having to hire one of those fly-by-night out-of-state contractors that's just chasing the storm and has very little experience. Chris and I, after Ian, unfortunately, had some claims that went south pretty quickly with a fly-by-night contractor. They try to include items that just aren't covered by the National Flood Insurance Program. They'll try to build in hotels, meals for the crew, personal protective equipment, provisions for fuel and other equipment that just aren't covered. The next item I wanted to hit, damage to windows and roofs. So we need to secure the building envelope to prevent further damage by tarping roofs and securing damaged windows. This is usually going to be a different contractor than the restoration contractor. Insurance carriers, once you do file that hurricane claim, they may also have vetted companies in the area that can come out and tarp roofs. And if not, the association's roofing contractor may be a good contact, especially if you've just replaced roofs or if you have an ongoing maintenance agreement. And then the last is loss of power. So does the association have generators that are capable of restoring power? Do we have the appropriate vendor contacts or alarm systems and elevators? So we have a few goals after a storm. If we can accomplish those 3 things, remediate the water damage, secure the building, and restore power, you're already going to be ahead of the curve and you can be ready for that rebuild.
Thanks. And to add to this, honestly, it's probably one of the main reasons that we at Alliance stay extremely involved in organizations like COMA or the CAI. If we find that being part of those groups allows us to continuously, network with the trusted industry professionals and stay up to date on best practices, especially when it comes to the hurricane recovery and the large-scale rebuilding efforts. Because of those relationships, we're able to connect to communities with a wide range of quality vendors who become valuable assets throughout their whole restorative, process. In addition to that, we do utilize a vendor management platform called Vive, which vets all of our vendors to ensure that they carry the proper licensing, insurance, that they can be able to handle these types of projects. We also believe in continuing education and accountability. We regularly review our vendor performance, stay engaged with the work they're doing in the field, and evaluate past projects to make sure that our standards are being met for our clients. At the end of the day, our Vive database contains thousands of vetted vendors across multiple trades and specialties to whom which applicable state licensing and insurance requirements, so that when our communities need support after a storm, we're able to move pretty quickly and confidently with those qualified professionals in the industry. So we really feel really strongly about that as well. Next, let's see. When a storm is imminent or underway, what do you find are the most critical decisions that must be executed immediately? And where do the boards or managers tend to kind of fall back, hesitate, or overstep?
Yeah, I can take this one. And everyone's going to continue to hear a common theme, not because we want to be redundant, but because it's of critical importance. First thing to do, confirm with your vendors that they have the capacity to mobilize. When are they going to be there? One of the questions I love to ask when you're vetting the contractors prior to the storm, how many other pre-loss agreements do they have in place? If they have 100 other pre-loss agreements, we're probably going to run into an issue after the storm. That's one of the questions that I love to ask. So number one, can the contractor mobilize and get to the property? I know from some of the names on the list here that a lot of these associations are in flood zones. It may not be every association, but when you have a flood event, it is absolutely critical that you get somebody out there early. As Burke alluded to, the flood carriers want you to rip out the damaged items, all of the porous items, not keep it in there. And you have to get that stuff out quickly. You've got to secure the envelope. That can only be done on the front end. Define who has the decision-making authority. And the way I look at this too, there's really three main points of contact. You want to designate somebody to handle the resident communication and answer the resident questions. By nature of flood claims, you are going to be more involved with the residents on the damage to the inside of the unit. So somebody needs to be the point person in terms of resident communication. Somebody needs to be the point person for dealing with the insurance adjusters or your CAM. You've got to file that claim quickly. Then somebody also needs to be on main point of contact for the contractors themselves too. So you might have multiple people doing that. I like separating the workload a little bit, because if you have one person answering the resident communication and that's the same person that's dealing with the contractors and the insurance adjusters, we tend to see delays there. Where I see the hesitation, and this can create issues, it's waiting for consensus, but then also not approving that initial remediation because you might be concerned of the cost. Hey, we haven't heard from our insurance adjuster yet. The length, it is more critical that you have a contractor in there to do the initial remediation work than it is to wait for the insurance adjuster. As long as your contractor knows how to properly handle flood and wind claims, you are going to be in a safe position because the insurance company does pay for the temporary repairs that you have to make. And so the biggest hesitation that we saw was, well, wait, we need to make sure that we can pay the contractor. Then we push them off, and guess what? They've gotten 20 other calls in that next week, and now they're going to a different job, and then your building is sitting there. That's the biggest hesitation that we see up front that can cause more downstream issues.
Oh gosh. So what does an effective communication and documentation strategy look like from, say, 5 days out through landfall? And how would that directly impact like the full claims outcome?
I'm just going to keep going here because I'm on a roll. First thing is have everything documented up front. And that is video of the pre-loss. I would do it in May of every single year. You want to get your building envelope, your windows and doors, your roof, your common areas, and your mechanical rooms. Those are the major components that you want to have time-stamped video documentation of. Save that into the cloud. Now you have your starting point, because anything that occurs after that storm, we can say, this is what it looked like before, this is what it looked like afterwards. Documentation is one of the biggest keys to getting the claims paid quickly. Obviously, from a communication standpoint too, you want to send messages out to the residents. I think it's very important that you make very clear from a liability standpoint Once the conditions become unsafe, meaning once there is any type of evacuation order, communication and activity at the property is going to cease. No one is going to be there at that point. We will not be back to the property until it is safe to return as outlined by governmental authority. So that's a key part of it. From an obvious standpoint, remove all of your loose blowing materials, take the stuff off of the pool, lock them up. If you do have any type of flood mitigation resources, we've seen a lot of clients move toward putting small flood barriers in place just to protect the critical infrastructure. So like your pumps, your electrical rooms, things like that. Obviously get the barriers out there, put up any shutters that you have. But in a nutshell, what you want to do, you want to tell the residents what you are going to do as the association, what you are not going to do as an association. And if we can be clear in that communication up front, outline where questions need to go to after the storm, i.e. your point contact, whoever that may be up front, that to me is what a good documentation and communication strategy looks like prior to the storm, or as it's imminent, I should say.
And documentation has been a heavy theme. And the association should have that on file well before a storm's imminent. But we've really just been alluding to the association documentation from a common element level. So condominium associations that do carry flood insurance, there's unit owner documentation that needs to take place. Unlike the property or hazard policy that stops at the bare drywall, the flood policies extend to unit owner improvements, flooring, cabinets, countertops, built-in appliances. They're all covered by the association's flood policy. And units can vary widely from originally installed builder's grade to very custom. So having that unit owner documentation goes a long way when we're pursuing supplemental claims funds. And unit owners are going to need that documentation for their HO6 unit owners carrier if they do sustain any wind damage.
Thank you. After the storm, what separates communities that recover quickly from those that struggle, particularly in how they may manage the contractors, document damage, and or navigate the claims process?
Yeah. So I want to kind of paint this macro picture here. So storm hits, we know that there's damage to the property, right? We know that we're like when Ian hit, we knew if you were on Fort Myers Beach, you were going to have damage. So number one, and this is where alliance structure and having somebody like Lindsay is so critical. We are filing claims the moment we know there's damage. You want to be high up on the claim queue because the reality of the situation is there are only so many carriers that write the policies in Florida. And when they get thousands of claims all at one time, they work it in the order in which they came in. So you want to be top of the line in terms of the claim queue. You get assigned to the adjuster. That's going on the side. You obviously want to get your contractor. We've already confirmed that they can mobilize and they're going to be at site. We've already confirmed we know how to pay the initial contractor. That contractor then comes out, documents all of their work. They rip out the porous materials and they secure the building envelope. So we don't want, if we need to put a roof tarp up, if we need to board up windows, that's where we need to end up and get the wet stuff out of the building. There's going to have to be a staging area where you keep some of the wet stuff for the flood adjuster. But in reality, even if you're at the top of the claims list, that adjuster may still take 2 days to 7 days before they come out and visit the property. So this is why it's so critical that you get the initial mitigation work done. All of that is going to be documented. That's the easy part. You're not going to get much of a pushback from the adjuster for tarping, boarding up windows and doors, and cutting out the wet stuff, right? You want to get the shell together so that you can now start to work on the rebuilding estimates. By the way, when your adjuster comes out, we're pushing for advance payments from the adjuster. We saw post-Ian, if there was obvious flood damage and it was significant, the adjusters could get advance funds from FEMA. Now that becomes critical, obviously, as we talk about the different buckets we can pull from. The sooner we can get those advance funds, the better. But what we want to do is we want to get to a point within a couple weeks after the storm where we have the building shell secured and now we're getting rebuild estimates. If we are getting rebuild estimates, that's what we're trying to run by the adjuster for agreement. We don't necessarily need to have agreement from the adjuster for the initial remediation, but I wouldn't start the rebuild project until we have all of that lined up and presented to the adjuster. Once the adjuster gives the okay, then we start the rebuild work. But that is the initial steps that we have to take. Get the claim filed quickly, get the initial remediation work done, push the adjuster for the advance payments, work on getting those rebuild estimates, and then we see congruence from the adjuster on the rebuild scope.
Awesome. So Lindsay, can you walk us through how we at Alliant handle the communications, the documentation, and some of the recovery efforts immediately after a storm?
Sure. We all learned so much after Ian, because obviously it was a unique animal that we all had to endure. Much like everything else that we do at Alliant, recovery is also a team approach. As soon as it's safe, we immediately begin assessing, triaging the association's needs based on, severity, things like that. We immediately begin assessing and just seeing where we need to go. One of the biggest advantages that we have in our structure is that we have different teams to focus on different areas. Your CAM will focus on the property, on-site needs. Our financial teams here, your financial manager, our banking specialist, they'll focus on the financial coordination. So if you already know you had money available to you, do we need to start moving funds around to make that available if we need to start cutting checks for our contractors? And then me, I'm an insurance coordinator here to assist everybody. I will be directly working with your agents and your adjusters to file and manage all the claims. So a lot of our associations, new onboarded associations, and ones we had with Ian, got a lot of claim money. Where is that coming? It's coming here. We're tracking it. We're organizing it. We're making sure it needs to go where it needs to go. Much like, a lot of your homeowners might be doing their own, their own claims with their own agents, and they might need that documentation as well. So the more organized I am, the easier it is for you and your owners when they have to do their claims. And like Zoe said, when we work with our trusted contractors and vendors already in place, it really helps us speed up just a response time and recovery efforts overall.
Thank you. So, in closing, if every association here could implement only one action item in the next 30 days to materially improve their hurricane readiness and recovery outcome, what would it be?
Do you know what I'm going to say to this one, Zoe?
I think I do.
Yeah. Do you have a plan? Make sure it's dusted off. Is it up to date enough to where you know exactly how it's going to unfold if a hurricane comes in 3 weeks from now? And if it's not where it needs to be, that's okay. You're certainly not alone. But then we need to set up a meeting with the stakeholders, with the board of director, the CAM, and we need to start talking about vetting the contractors in the right manner. So if there is not an actionable plan in place today, or if it's old, set the meeting, start putting the plan in place. If you can implement some of the things we talked about today, we can virtually assure you that the claim is going to go more smoothly the next time a storm hits. It's not going to be perfect. Hurricane claims stink. No matter what, when people's lives are upended from storm damage, it is never going to be an easy process. It's just going to stink less if you have the right planning in place.
Well, I think from my little tidbit to take home, review your financials, see where you're at, see if you need to start putting more money in reserve, see if you maybe need to ask your financial manager, do we need to start putting in a line item for our budget next year? A big thing, it would be understand your deductible. If these gentlemen here are your agents, start having those conversations. If they are not, let's have conversations with your agents. And lastly, communication, as far as if you finally have that plan in place, let us at Alliant know what that plan is so we can implement it on our end as well for you.
Thanks, Lindsay. And you guys, it is 11:38. You've done so well on time. So I'm hoping we could take a few moments to answer some of our audience questions. So, you guys okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. So we have Mr. Stephen Shuey has asked, no coverage for landscaping, not even a special policy, ? Should associations have special fund to cover such incidents?
Yeah, I mean, I can take this one, and Bert, feel free to sub in. Yeah, landscaping is one of the biggest exposures that a lot of associations face, and different associations have a different level of landscaping. And so flood situations have never covered landscaping. There is a little bit of coverage on the wind policy, but there's nuances to it. There's a cap on every tree, plant, shrub. The tree actually has to damage the building for them to pay to remove it in most cases. And so landscaping is always going to be something that has limited coverage. There is a recent, well, I say recent, within the last couple of weeks, Lloyd's of London put together a landscaping plan, but the premium is about 1/10 of the limit. So if it's a $50,000 limit, you're paying like $5,500 a year, and then it's a 10% deductible. And then there's caps in place. So I don't think it's worth the standalone landscaping policy, but there are some plans that exist. It's just not cost effective from the association standpoint.
And I can elaborate a little bit on that. Yeah, I see the second question is about parametric policies, and the way that works, if a hurricane comes within X miles of the association, there's a sliding scale on payment. The problem with these policies is they're incredibly expensive. So for your max payout of $100,000, you could expect to pay $10,000 to $15,000 in premium annually. So if you did that over the last 30 years, you'd be way behind in terms of paying that premium versus what you actually received. So just wanted to chime in on why it's not typically feasible for the parametric policies. I think, Chris, we've sold less than 5 in our careers. It just doesn't really make financial sense.
Thanks, Burke. Thanks, Chris. Let's see. I see Mr. Tinkle has asked, can owners' prepaid assessments be used to cover an emergency fund? This is kind of also, in my opinion, key where you're looking at your documents to see what allowances, whether that's a membership vote, whether you've already granted that authority at your annual meeting. I think that's key, is reviewing state statute and your own individual association documents. Because a lot of the time those state emergency fund mandate or emergency mandates kind of help guide that as well. So we have to look at all of those to determine whether the prepaid can be used in that sense of emergency. I don't know if you all have anything else to offer on that.
No, I agree with what you said. A lot of times the prepaid assessments are already in different buckets, so you have to make sure you know how to unlock those different buckets. If they're already tied up in the reserves, you can't unlock a reserve for an item that's not damaged in a lot of cases. So knowing the documents up front is key.
Awesome, thank you. So another question is, when you speak of documentation, are you suggesting like ongoing videos of damage with corrective action taken? That's a good.
And then you know what? I see one from Nancy too, where it says what to get videos, like what to get in the videos again. I think she's asking about what I said to take videos of. So Stephen, to answer your question, no, we do not want ongoing videos while the property is getting hit by a hurricane. If you have some cameras out there and the storm's rolling in and you see it, that's fine. It's more important to have the property and its condition documented before the hurricane ever hit. Then after the loss, after the hurricane hits, there will be more photos taken by the adjusters and the contractors, and then you do kind of a straight line type of comparison. The major components to answer Nancy's question that you want to make sure you have: your roof system and any ACs that you have on the roof, the exterior building envelope, meaning your windows and the paint and the stucco on the outside of the building, your common areas. So if you have a lobby on the ground floor, that'd be considered a common area. And then your critical infrastructure. So your mechanical or your electrical rooms, usually those are at the bottom of the building, inside the building. So you want to have your mechanical, electrical rooms, any critical infrastructure as far as machinery that services the building, your roofs, your envelope, and your common areas.
Thanks, Chris. So another question, Mr. Smith, how does the RCBAP fit into the association flood policy? How should this be documented and the process in the association flood policy?
So Yeah, I could touch it. So the RCBAP stands for Residential Condominium Building Association Policy. So that, for all intents and purposes, is the flood policy that the association has on the residential buildings. And then, as I touched on, because that policy extends to the interior improvements, not only do we want that documentation at the association level for the exterior elements, but also the interior improvements of the unit owners.
Yeah, if you know what, if I could add to that, Shane, I never want to make assumptions, but the flood policy operates different than the wind. The association wind policy stops at the bare drywall. It covers the exterior of the building up to the bare drywall. Flood is a completely different beast. So we have to write it on the RCBAP policy because that's what the lenders require. FEMA is the entity that sets the actual coverage form, meaning what's covered on this policy. FEMA is what tells us we have to cover the inside of those units on the flood side. What I see a big mistake all the time is residents will have their own individual flood policy. But in reality, the association's flood policy, because it covers the inside of the unit, is primary. The max limit that you can get is 250,000 times the number of units in the building. So if you have a 4-unit building, the most flood coverage you can purchase is $1 million, 4 times 250. If I'm an owner and I have my own flood policy on that building, and let's say I have building coverage on it, it will not pay you. If the association flood policy is already at the max limit, that's the only policy that's going to pay. The only thing you need to purchase as a unit owner is contents coverage for your flood. So if I took the building and shook it upside down, whatever falls out, that is the only thing. If your association is in the flood zone and has an RCBAP policy, content should be the only thing that you're worried about as a unit owner. I see all the time where unit owners have building and contents on their individual flood, but the building portion will never pay out.
Thanks, Chris. So Martin asked, do we have a template to work off for hurricane preparedness plan? Lindsay?
We actually are currently working on updating ours as we speak. As soon as it will become available, we'll send it out to all of our board members. And of course, if there's any questions or anything, we always can set up time to review and see what other additional questions come up.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I also wanted to touch on, Virginia, your question. How do we put in place the seasonal resident site contact and permissions? Again, key factor, review bylaws to determine what kind of extensions you are granted as board. Once you review those with your CAM, then you can decipher whether it's, a requirement to have an emergency contact or a requirement to have keys on site, things of that. I think that's going to be the best way to determine what to instate and how to instate it. I see a really good question. I personally think it's a good question because I feel like in the CAM aspect, we saw more of this in Ian than we did in Irma. But what are the panelists' recommendations on the public adjusters working with negotiations with the insurance companies?
I have a pretty firm viewpoint on this. I have recommended public adjusters and attorneys in the past. So let me start by saying that. But the reality is, I think most insurance companies want to do the right thing if we have the right documentation and we communicate effectively up front. So what I always tell our clients are, let the process play out initially. Get your vendors out there, your contractors. Let's file the claim with the adjuster. And like Burke and I, for example, are very involved with our clients' claims. I can't speak to how some of the other agencies do it, but Burke is actually a licensed adjuster. We're making sure they're getting the right info that they need. I would not pay the public adjuster fee or an attorney fee upfront, because if you start with a PA or an attorney, the insurance carrier immediately bows up because they know this is now going to be a fight. And the reality is, there is a place for public adjusters and there is a place for the attorneys. But normally when they get involved, we see two things. We see big delays in terms of the actual payout. And then we also see the middle people making the majority of the money. I mean, most attorneys are between 20 and 30%. PAs are between 10% of the claim amount. What I always say is, let's get the initial offer from the insurance company. If we think that the insurance company is not playing fair, then we get the public adjuster. Let's pay the public adjuster on the difference between what the insurance company offered us and what the final recovery is. That's how you really ascertain if the public adjuster is worth their weight. I saw a lot of associations immediately hire the PA. They get a $1.5 million payout. They're paying $150K to the PA. They would have gotten the same payout without the PA in the first place. So I would do it the other way and focus more on the quality of your contractors and make sure that they're documenting what they're doing better. And there's less of a need for a PA in that situation.
And if I can elaborate on that a little further, one tactic that we've seen that really leads to disaster in the future is the public adjuster. Let's say the roof's damaged. The association wants the roof replaced. They'll go after the roof, replacement of all windows, replacement of all doors. And the tactic is just to get the insurance carrier to settle with the roof amount to replace the roof. Now, the problem we see is the board is signing a proof of loss, putting in writing that all windows and doors have been damaged. Right. So now when we're going into renewal marketing, carriers are smart. The internet's out there. Now they can see online that the association has put in writing that all windows and doors are damaged. They have the new roof, but it creates these issues for years to come. So something to watch out for with the public adjuster tactics.
Thank you. I do want to make a quick little shout out. Nancy on the chat advised that it took 1 year for SBA loan funding. 1 year. That's a long time. And we've seen some that were longer. Yeah. So that was a good thing for Nancy to make mention. Yep. Terry, so our trusted listed vendors is internal for us. What I would recommend is ask your CAM, hey, can I have a list of XYV vendors as we start bridging or building, our emergency plan. So that's my recommendation there. I do want to take just a few more questions before we close up. We're creeping on the noon hour. Lee has asked, is there a recommended % of overall budget that would be set aside for these types of events? This would include reserves, credit lines, etc.
That's a very good and relevant question. And unfortunately, the answer is it's never a one size fits all. It depends on your community. Are you in the flood zone? Are you not in the flood zone? That dictates a lot about how you allocate the reserves. What types of deductibles are you able to get? Are you able to get? I mean, older buildings that are coastal tend to have higher wind deductibles than say newer buildings that are built inland, which will have lower. So it depends on what your exposure is. How much landscaping do we have? What are our deductibles? Are we in the flood zone? If you answer all of those yes, then you need to have a higher percentage of your budget allocated to it. If it's no, that I think it's one of those things that you have to talk internally on a case-by-case basis as you come up with the hurricane plan. So I'm sorry I can't be super specific on that, but in my mind, the proper hurricane plan is directly related to the specific exposure of that particular community.
Thanks, Chris. I want to see if we can squeeze in a few more. Has the lithium battery fire risk changed insurers' coverage parameters for fire? That's
from Denise. Sorry, I don't mean to capitalize, but she's one of our clients.
Oh.
So the answer is not yet, Denise, not yet. It is definitely something that has been discussed on the CARES. I still have not seen it as an underwriting question on the applications yet, but we did see a correlation of EV fires. Golf carts are another very common thing that has lithium ion batteries, e-bikes, golf carts, and then obviously your electric vehicles. If you are in a flood zone and you have EVs, the one thing I would say, do not let anybody start those things in the building, because that is when you start to get those really bad EV fires, and it takes so much more water to put those out than a standard fire. If you do have a flood event and there are people with EVs in the garage, or worse, if you're a high rise with a parking garage under the building and you have EV, if we're not asking people to get the EVs out as part of our hurricane plan, which wink, wink, that should be part of the hurricane plan too, those things need to be towed out of the building. Do not start them after a flood event in particular. And I do think insurance will eventually catch up to it, but as of now, I have not seen it directly affect premiums yet. Obviously, if we have a fire claim in one of the buildings, that can indirectly affect premiums in the future. So if we have fire losses, when we go out to market, insurance companies probably charge a higher premium based on the loss history. But no, there's no direct correlation as of yet from the EV standpoint.
Thanks, Chris. Real quick, does insurance coverage for an HOA include the perimeter wall for the community? And would that be based on the type of wall? Is there a percentage of the claim solely based on that regarding the deductible, or is it an actual cash value replacement?
I can answer that. So typically the wall's going to need to be scheduled on the policy. There's not going to be an automatic extension for that wall. Depending on the type of wall, whether it's metal or concrete, that would just affect the respective premium. You'd have a higher premium for a non-combustible, like a metal fence. And then the deductible should be per that wall value. So if it's 5% hurricane deductible for a $100,000 wall, you should have that $5,000 deductible that's applicable.
Thanks, Burke. One more, Brianna Sutherland. Does our association need to get flood insurance if FEMA has changed our association from a zone X to a zone B?
No, you're not required. Zones X, C, B are not required. If you're in any zone that starts with an A or a V, then you are required to carry flood insurance based on lender requirements.
Thanks, Chris. And Steve Shuey did have one follow-up comment. As far as his documentation question, in other words, should it be a board member or a committee member be assigned to the duty of documentation to help justify the claim?
I would have the board or committee member as a backup, but your contractor, if they know how to properly handle these types of claims, should absolutely be documenting everything that they're doing. They're taking pictures when they walk in to show the water line. That is absolutely critical to be able to unequivocally say where the water line is. They're supposed to be cutting the drywall out above the water line at the next available sheet. And so all of that gets photographed and documented. And then when they're invoicing you, their invoicing needs to be broken out by labor and materials. That's what FEMA pays on. And honestly, the wind carriers, that's what they pay on too. So we need to be able to support everything they're doing with a specific labor and material costs along with the photo documentation. A good contractor knows this going in, and they're going to have all of those in zip files for you. But me personally, I trust but verify, so to speak. So if you are able to have a representative, whether it be the CAM, whether it be a board member who's there to manage the contractors, I would be taking backup photos of this stuff. Just if you have significant damage, the more photos, the better.
Thanks, Chris. So we're going to wrap it up. And again, thank you so much to Chris, Burke, and Lindsay for sharing your time, your expertise, and your valuable insights